Guten Morgen.
Good morning, that was. But I figure you got Guten Morgen.
Ja, es ist sehr schön, dass ihr alle wieder da seid. Es freut mich immer sehr. Ich arbeite sehr
Good to see you're all back, and I'm always happy to see that the professionals are always on time. Later on with a family conference, that might change slightly. There's so much to do, so much to talk about, and we as parents, of course, understand.
Wir würden ganz gerne starten und ich habe mir
We'd like to get started, and I've invited a moderator again, and she'll introduce herself and will then announce our first speaker.
sagen. Ich übergebe jetzt mal das Mikrofon.
And I'll hand over the microphone.
Ja, hallo auch von mir.
Hello from me as well. I'm Caroline Boska. I also have CHARGE syndrome. I'm 24 years old and I'm currently training as a hospitality professional in a hotel. And with that, I'd say over to the next presentation by Dr. Nancy Salem-Hartshorne. I hope I pronounced it correctly. And she will speak about person-centered future planning. Enjoy!
Good morning. I want to talk about a different way to plan for our students. Some of you may have heard of this. In the United States, it is used sometimes and has been taken to the point where it's used by a lot of agencies, but then they sort of take it down and make it very manualized, if you know what I mean by that. So it loses some of its magic that way. So I wanted to talk about the way that I do this person-centered planning. So who am I? I am, get me back to my English, there we go. I'm a psychology professor at a community college. Community college in the US is a 2-year college where students can come and either get a shorter, what we call associate's degree, and be able to work in a trade, or they start their college and it's less expensive, and then they can move into a 4-year college from there. I just retired 6 weeks ago, so I should take that off the slide, but I'm a parent of a lot of boys, so this is our family up here. So I have a lot of kids, and you can see my son Jacob is on the very right. I'm Tim's wife, I didn't say that. And I speak at CHARGE syndrome conferences, obviously, everywhere. I really am an advocate for people with disabilities to have a good quality of life. And, but most of all, I'm Jacob's mother. This is one of the reasons I've retired early, is so that I can have more time to manage his situation where he lives. It became difficult to do that and work at the same time. So what is our traditional way of planning for supports for students with disabilities? Typically, we take the individual student, and I am trained as a school psychologist, so the person who does the assessments of the individual students. And we take them, and we would take a child and do an IQ test and do achievement testing in mathematics and writing and reading. This is what I would do with a typical student, maybe who was suspected of having a learning disability or attention deficit disorder or cognitive impairment. Take them in my little room and do all my testing and write my report and come back to the meeting and explain it to the parents. Your child has this disability. Here are some suggestions I have made for how to help them. This doesn't always work for children with CHARGE syndrome, obviously. So we need something else. This is what traditional assessment looks like, standardized tests. Is that all of them? Okay. Each team member does a separate assessment, so you have the occupational therapist does their assessment, the physical therapist does theirs, the teacher does theirs. Everyone comes together to discuss the results. The parent may or may not have input. In the United States, often it's unfortunate that the parents aren't consulted. And that's really sad because especially, well, all children, but if you're a parent, you know what I mean. Nothing should be done without the parent's input, right? We look primarily at academic skills, and the goals and objectives are mostly for school-based intervention. So what can we do with the child at school? What's wrong with this model? Well, I think there's a lot wrong with this model for all children. As a school psychologist, I would reinvent all of that and make it different. But for most children with multi-sensory impairment, including those with CHARGE, it doesn't help that they have a sensory impairment, communication difficulty, medical issues, and all the other things that our kids with CHARGE have to deal with on a daily basis will make that kind of assessment really difficult. You can't use a traditional IQ test with an individual with CHARGE, for instance, a typical individual with CHARGE. I like this boy's expression. Okay, so the question is, how do we see the whole child? Instead of just looking at, this cartoon says severely dysfunctional. Oh, I'm sorry, that's the wrong slide. Look back. How do we see the whole child? Try to see the whole kid with no boxes, that says. So we're not going to put the occupational therapy goals in this box and the physical therapy goals in this box and the teaching goals in this box. We want to see the child as a whole person. Here's the cartoon. It says severely dysfunctional team. So you can see there's the physical therapist taking the legs, the occupational therapist taking the arms, the teacher takes the head. But isn't that what we do a lot of the time? So the idea here is that assessment must be multidisciplinary, must have everyone involved together, and ideally integrated. We should all be working together. Do an assessment maybe in the child's home, in the school, with the whole team there discussing, talking about what you're seeing together. And you might come up with a lot of these issues that Tim and David have talked about if you're doing this collaboratively. Come on. Okay. So here I go again. Assessment has to start with the individual and the family. Many of you probably practice this way already, but when you're working with a child with CHARGE syndrome, deafblindness, multiple disabilities, or any disability, talking to the family should come first. Families know the whole history of that child. None of my son's teachers had his whole history. They saw what they saw in their clip of time when they have him that year. They didn't know about all the things he had been through prior to that, which affected his education and behavior. Getting that history from the family is really important. This is probably an idiom that doesn't translate, but we will say things like, who wears the pants in your family? Meaning, who has the control? It's me. But this says the family should be wearing the pants. All right. So person-centered planning is the approach we're going to use today, talk about today. It's holistic, and it's a very positive approach. We're not looking at the weaknesses of the individual child. We're looking at everything positively and holistically, the whole child. The papers are all stuck together because of the rain. Okay, so what is person-centered planning? It's a family of approaches, and we're going to talk about one specific approach today, that organizes and guides communities to change in alliance with people with disabilities. Not for. We're not doing this for the individual with disabilities, we're doing it with them. And right there you can see the whole paradigm change that takes place here. We're not servicing people, we are working with them to make their lives better. We're learning through shared action. We tend to change things in a community when we do this, things like segregation, devaluing, and what I mean by that is people with disabilities are always the ones that you see picking up trash. That's their job. That devalues them. Does that make sense? We have crews that do that in our community. Denial of opportunity. I was speaking to someone yesterday about their child who is recently moving into a pretty segregated setting, and in order to live there, this child has to work in their workshop at their setting. And so there's no choice there. That's their work because that's where they live. So it denies opportunity, it stimulates hospitality, it gathers community members together to help people toward a desirable future. You're not just looking to help the child learn the most they can learn to be ready for the future, but you're helping to build them a future that might be something that they will enjoy. It can only happen if we have respect and we believe that the person is a complete person and has dignity. Did I skip one? I'm sorry, I did skip one. That's the one I just went over. Okay. A little bit of history. Here's our son Jacob again. Historically, a person with disability was seen over the millennia of human history as several different things. They could be seen as subhuman, as a menace, an object of ridicule. Think of things like court jesters, who are often people with disabilities. The burden of charity. Sometimes they were seen as angels. Over the years, there's sort of been this shift up and down. People with disabilities are seen as really good or really bad, really good or really bad. And right now we're in an upshift, thank goodness, because of laws changing, and we're trying to respect people with disabilities. Hopefully it will not turn around again. But these views encouraged all kinds of nasty practices, which I'm sure you've heard of. So we need to see each person as a person of value, and we need to think of each person as an individual who's a citizen and who has potential to be a part of their community. Why do we do this? Usually, historically, at least in the US, what a person with a disability can do and can be is defined by the setting they're in and not by themselves. So as I said, you have a person living in sort of an institutionalized, segregated setting. They must do what everyone else is doing there. They must take part in the work that happens there. And I don't know about you, but that's not something I want for my life. I want to have choices in my life. Maybe that's a very American way to be, be all you can be, and you can be anything you want to be, and we're all brought up to think that way in the United States anyway. So we need to look at that all individuals, no matter how many disabilities they have strengths, talents, and skills that can be used in the community. And I'll give you some examples of that in a minute. We need to break the cycle of isolation. We need to help every individual become a participating member in their community and not pushed off to the side. And everybody knows through tons and tons of research that having good social relationships is important to our well-being. Loneliness does not help us, health-wise or emotionally. Okay, so here are some values of person-centered planning. As I said before, everybody has strengths, gifts, and contributions. Every person has hopes, dreams, and desires, and these are very often ignored in people with disabilities. Each person should have the primary authority over what happens to them. And even a person with very significant communication difficulties like my son, he should have the primary authority over what happens in his life. And sometimes that's because his parents help him make those decisions based on what they think will be best. Every person has the ability to make choices and express their preferences, even if it's just what Tim said about choose which shirt you're going to wear today. That's a choice, and that gives that person power. And you must always consider their preferences and choices. This is a famous T-shirt bumper sticker in the US for people with disabilities, "Nothing about me without me." I don't know if that translates well or not. But don't discuss me unless I'm there, is basically what it says. Okay, so goals of person-centered planning. Through the person-centered plan, this is what we need to make sure happens in the end. We want the person to be present and participate in their community. Gain and maintain satisfying relationships. Express preferences and make choices. Continue to develop competencies, so continue to learn, continue to move on and do other things, and fulfill respected roles and live your life with dignity. So look at this list for a minute and think about your own life. Are these things that you want for yourself? For your own children. If these are things you want for yourself and your own children, why wouldn't it be the same for people with disabilities? Okay, moving on. We have 4 different directions that we want to cover to build a community life. Encouraging friendships. So I want you to think about, how did you meet your best friend or your spouse or your significant other person? How did you meet? On the internet. Yeah, that's a newer way to meet, right? We met at a university in the psychology department. Anyone else want to volunteer? At school. So you may have met someone at school because you're in the same sort of studying area, or you may have met someone in a religious organization because you share similar beliefs. You may have met someone because you have a similar hobby. Maybe you met them because you sing in a choir together, or you play Dungeons and Dragons together, or something like that. But generally, you meet people and become friends by starting by being in a group. And that's true of all people. Teenagers will even say they start out by hanging out in big groups, and then they identify who they want to be with inside of that group, okay? So how do you think we can help people with disabilities make meaningful friendships? We have to get them into those kinds of groups so people will identify as their friends. This gets at the same kind of thing here. So here's a group of people that are all part of one group that's working on one project together. Okay, the second direction is to build school, work, and homemaker roles. So this is our son, Jacob. This is one of his caregivers. He's in his own home. He lives next door to us in his own home with caregivers. He lives there alone, but he has care 24/7, all day, all night. But it's his home, and he lives there alone. So here she is helping him to do his dishes, assisting him with cleaning his own kitchen. So he's getting homemaker roles learned right there. He helps do his own laundry. He helps with other chores around the house. So to find work roles that work, we need to find job opportunities that are related to the person's specific interests. Okay, don't you want to work in a role that is interesting to you, right? So Jacob had a new job opportunity a few years ago that came up. When he was very young, I used to think about, what kind of work can this individual do? He loves vibration, he loves lights, he loves fans, right? All of these sensory things, and what will work for that? So we have a children's museum, which is I don't know if you have them here or what they're called, but the children can go in and play with all kinds of toys. It's a large area. And one of the rooms has a big, on the wall, I don't know if you have them, Light Bright. Do you have Light Bright here? You do in Canada. It's a board with pegs all over it that light up, and you can make pictures with the different colors. Does that sound familiar? Okay, so it's like a giant Light Bright. It's a big pegboard with lots of different colored transparent rods in it. Okay, so he goes in there every Twice a week, he goes in there, he takes his bucket, and he pulls out rods, and then he takes them to another room, dips them in sanitizing solution, dries them off, takes them back, and the fun part is when he gets to put them back and they light up. Okay, Jacob's not one who loves to go to work. He doesn't have a lot of stamina, for one thing, and I wouldn't say he's lazy, but he's kind of like me. He doesn't want to work real hard. He's got my personality, I guess. So, but that is something that, even though he may not want to do it that day, it's much more enjoyable to him than, say, folding pizza boxes or sweeping up trash or something like that. And so it builds on his own interests. Okay, the third direction is to encourage neighborhood connections. How do you become a valued person at local places? How do you become a neighbor in your community? You have to be part of your community for that to happen. You can't be over in a separate group home or in a separate institution for this to happen. So Jacob grew up going to our church. It's an Episcopal church. He doesn't really go anymore, but neither do my other boys, and I don't go that much either. Tim goes all the time. But so everyone at church knows who he is. They've known him since he was a baby. They love him. They care about him. When they see him in the community, they care about him. They see him. They ask how he's doing. They greet him. He has been fully included in school. So from the first day of kindergarten, he was in the general education classroom with a deafblind intervener. And he had special education consultation on the side that came into the classroom instead of being in a segregated classroom. So from the beginning, he's had friends all through school until about 7th grade, middle school, 12 years old. It kind of fell apart then. And part of that was because the school didn't cooperate with us very well. Part of it was because top subjects become more difficult to integrate him into. But he had a really good school situation all the way through high school, even though it wasn't inclusive. But all those kids still know him. So he has a Facebook page. He has lots of friends on Facebook. He's never actually been on his Facebook page. I manage it, but his friends are all there, and they're friends with him. He doesn't see any value in that or understand it. So whenever we take him, he goes to the grocery store once a week to do his shopping. And invariably, whoever's with him that day will say, "Oh, somebody came up and talked to Jacob today and asked me how he was doing." And, "Well, do you know who it was?" "No, I don't know who it was." Or maybe it was his old speech therapist or someone who used to be in his classroom or someone who knew him from church. But people in our community know him because he's grown up there. It's a smaller city. It's not a huge city. It's a university town. But he is a regular customer. He's a valued member of the community. All right, so there are several types of planning processes. Here are some of them. We have something called personal futures plans. We have PATH, planning alternative tomorrows with hope. And the one we're going to talk about today is called MAPS, and that stands for Making Action Plans. So this is an invitation to one of Jacob's MAPS meetings. I'll say what it says. At the very top, it has a quote by George Bernard Shaw that says, "Some see things and say, why? But I dream things that never were, and I say, why not?" That sets the tone of what we're doing at this meeting. You are invited to Jacob Hartshorne's future. Please come and help unlock the doors into my exciting future by participating in my person-centered plan. And then it has the date, the time, and the place. And we held it at our church because it had a large room we could use. But one of the main reasons is because it's a neutral area. Well, not necessarily neutral because it's our place of belonging, but we don't hold it at the school. Because often, and I'm not saying this to say anything bad about any of you in your schools, but when a parent comes to the school, it feels like the school has the power because you're in the school's building. Does that make sense? So you try to hold a person-centered plan in a more neutral environment so that everybody kind of has equal power, except for the person. They have the power, and their family, they have the most power. So what is a person-centered plan? It says, a team approach to help plan my future. Why are you invited? You know me in a way that no one else does. You are important to me. What to bring? An open, creative mind and a loving heart. Also, your appetite. And then it says, call to let us know if you're going to be there. And then it says, together we can make my future bright. So you can already see the tone of this is so different than any other kind of planning meeting you've been to. So how do we decide who to invite to the meeting? Do we just invite all the people from the school? No, we invite anybody we want to help plan our future. Think about who would you want at your meeting? Who are your best friends? Who loves you most? Who do you love most? What groups are you involved in? At my planning meeting, I would want my husband, I would want my children, I would want 2 of my sisters, but not my other sister, because she'll bring a negative vibe, into things. So, and there are some people who may say, I don't want my mother at my meeting, because my mother controls everything, and I want this to be about me. You never know what the individual will say. But so the person who the meeting is about gets to decide who to invite. And, we've had meetings where we've said, yeah, we want Jacob's teacher, but we don't want his speech therapist because she's very negative. Or, on the other hand, we want everyone there because we want to change everybody's thinking about Jacob. Yes?
Could you explain a little bit how you would help someone who maybe doesn't communicate fluently with formal language to decide who they want?
Yes, through their family. So for Jacob, Tim and I decided who to invite to the meeting because Jacob doesn't communicate formally, but we're so involved in his life that we know who would contribute the most. We have control over him. We're his guardians. But still, I think we have his best interests at heart more than maybe the principal of the school, the administrator. Do you see what I mean? So if it's not the individual person, it's their family or the person that they feel closest to assist them. Okay. And we had at Jacob's Person-Centered Plan, which our last one was done during COVID. Was it? Oh, thank you. Wasn't our last one done during COVID? And so we had everybody in on Zoom. It was really interesting. All his brothers were there. It was actually the first time all his brothers had been there because we were on Zoom. It was actually a good thing. And we talked about his guardianship and who will take care of him after we're gone and all these. We got to have all these discussions we wouldn't have had otherwise. So person-centered planning is basically a very positive group brainstorming process. You have to have a skilled facilitator. And I can already anticipate people coming up to me and saying, where do we find one? And it's difficult, but I believe there must be people here in Germany who are skilled at doing this. Someone who's been trained to do this in a very positive way. Everyone in the group has an equal voice, except the person in their family have the loudest voice. So everyone can contribute. Everyone can say what they think. It's fun and relaxed, but it's also respectful and serious. So we will sit around in a big circle and we'll say, hey, we have all these snacks. It's a party atmosphere. We have fidgets all over the table, if that translates, things to play with your hands, Play-Doh and little puzzles and things, because a lot of people think better while they're doing that. Food, people get up and get food as they want. It's a celebration of someone's life, basically. And as I said, it's held in a neutral or family choice place. The first thing we do in a MAPS process is talk about the person's history. So you can see behind these people that large piece of paper. That's what it looks like after a map is completed. So when I facilitate a MAPS process, I will have large pieces of paper across the wall. I ask the questions that happen during the process, and then all I do as a facilitator is to take notes, write down what people say, encourage more discussion, ask questions, but I don't lead the group into any specific direction. Okay. So what people and events have shaped this person's life? What have been the highlights? How have others present been a part of the history? Here's a map we did for Jacob. Sorry. Yes, the person is always there. You know, Jacob doesn't hear, doesn't see well, but he can eat some of the food. He can greet people. We try to make it comfortable for him. But he doesn't really participate in the actual discussion because he's unable. He communicates, but he doesn't communicate to that formal extent. So we were his representatives and advocates. So here's the history we talked about. The history can get very long with individuals with CHARGE syndrome because there are a lot of medical things that happen when they're very young. So I tried to keep it very brief, but we wanted to make sure that everyone there, including his 5th grade teacher, understood what he's been through in his life and what our family has been through and how that affected his life. Because it's important for everybody to be on the same page. And it's quite eye-opening for some general ed teachers to realize like that my son has had 36 different surgeries. You know, well, no wonder they have difficulty with this and this and this. They've been through so much. It's something they might never have known otherwise. So we say, May 10th, Jacob was born 8 weeks premature. We found out he had CHARGE syndrome. We moved from Kansas to Michigan when he was 3 months old and began early intervention services. He got a gastrostomy tube at age 2. And then in 1992, 2 of his siblings died in a car accident. Yesterday was the anniversary. And I was very happy to be here in Germany because it was very distracting. And I didn't think about it very much. But these were 2 people. This is a very important event in his life because these were 2 people who would have been fierce advocates for him, maybe taken over guardianship. And now they were gone. So he lost 2 major supports. He started in the severe disabilities classroom when he was 2 3/4 years old. And then I went to a conference and learned about inclusion. This was back in 1993 when the inclusion push was really starting, and the Americans with Disabilities Act had not even been signed yet. So we didn't have ramps on buildings or elevators for people with disabilities or anything like that yet in the United States. And going to those conferences was kind of like going to a civil rights rally. They were really fun. And I learned a lot about, these people need to be in our general community. We're tired of segregation, things like that. So then we started pushing for him to go to his neighborhood school, kindergarten at age 5. Instead of staying in that severe classroom. Then his brother Seth was adopted. We adopted our son from Guatemala. So here he had another support, really important to his life. He started walking at age 7, and I kind of had to smile last night when we were hearing that the young man, who was his name? Julian. Julian was walking at age 2, and that's so very late. And I thought, oh my goodness. Jacob walked at age 7, and I thought, first CHARGE, that's actually very early. So, and then his brother Aaron was born in 1997, so another fierce advocate, and both of them, Aaron and Seth, both would like to be his guardians now. So this is a wonderful development for him. And then I wrote a grant proposal for the Deaf-Blind Project in Michigan, the State Deaf-Blind Project, to come to our community, and I directed that for a while. So that was huge in his life too, because I don't direct it anymore, but we have this deaf-blind project that's right in our city, 3 blocks from our home, that we can access, even though he has aged out of it. we know the person very well. I hired her. She's wonderful. She'll help, she'll help me with ideas and things like that. So that's very important. And then at age 13, he got a cochlear implant. His G-tube removed at age 15, and he started eating. And so at the time of this person-centered plan, which was now 18 years ago, he was turning 17, and he was getting ready to walk in his graduation, walk across the stage for his diploma, not an actual state-endorsed diploma, with his peers. And interestingly, when he walked at graduation, he got more applause than any other student. So that was the power of the community and the inclusion we had done. Okay, so we talk about his history. We tried to keep it kind of brief, but it brings everyone up to speed. I mean, some of these people didn't know he had lost siblings in a car accident or that he had ever had a gastrostomy tube. Those are really important events. Then we talk about dreams. So I put up another big piece of paper and we talk about what are our dreams for Jacob? Or if the individual is able to communicate those dreams themselves, what are your dreams for yourself? And no dream is too big or too small. No dreams are too ridiculous. This is a brainstorming process. I had a friend once who someone in her group dreamed that she could go skydiving. This was an individual with very severe cerebral palsy who used a wheelchair. And she went, when they said that, she didn't like that idea. But we can brainstorm anything we want on the dreams, right? So our dreams for Jacob were huge from when he was very young. So dreams may be open-ended. They don't have to be realistic. They can be short-term and long-term. And they give you hope and a possible direction. So again, brainstorming, any brainstorming process starts with large ideas and then hones down into action steps that you can take to work towards those dreams. So here are some of the dreams that we had for Jacob in his person-centered plan. Have people in his life that he likes and that know about CHARGE syndrome. Visit a beach regularly. He loves the ocean and water. Live independent of his parents and be comfortable. And then have a vibrating chair because he just loves that, right? So some are small, some are big. Some of his friends would say, we don't ever want Jacob to be alone, or his brothers would say that because he needs somebody to help him because he's deaf and blind. He doesn't feel safe without an intervener with him. Find a way to unlock his potential. That's a very vague dream. Have a home in his parents' neighborhood that is cool, safe, and fun. His occupational therapist wants him to eat, chew, and enjoy food. He still doesn't chew. We haven't quite got there yet. Ability to communicate pain. That's a huge one. That's one of the only things we can't figure out with Jacob is when he shows pain behaviors like Tim was talking about, the wrenching his neck. Does that mean an ear infection or not? And when he's in pain, what is it? Could it be appendicitis? We'd never know, right? It's a very difficult thing to deal with. Have a social life outside of his family. Become independent in the bathroom. This is really, really important because, at least in the US, statistics show that most sexual abuse of people with disabilities happens with caregivers in the bathroom. So the more independent you can be in your bathing and your toileting, the less risk you have of being abused. Have meaningful daily activities and have visits with his brothers. Here's another individual that I did a person-centered plan for him, and he has CHARGE syndrome also. He's a pretty capable individual in terms of sign language and being able to communicate his needs. So you can see that his is very different. We were asked to come and do some assessment of him because his behavior had gotten really bad, and he was being educated in a different building than the rest of the school with 3 different adults helping him. because his behavior had gotten very dangerous. And it was very sad, and so we tried to do an assessment, we did a person-centered plan, we tried to help the team come up with other ideas that might help him more. Have a lifelong partner, serve as an acolyte, unlock his potential, work with trees, which was something he loved, have meaningful employment, be aware of and have joy in his surrounding. So you can see all of these are wonderful. An appropriate physical facility for school, be surrounded by peers that aren't afraid of him. Martial arts, independence, have a pet, use his aggression in a positive way. So you can see all of these things were his dreams and his family's dreams for him. I will tell you that he also loved the video game Zelda, anything related to Zelda, which, you know, some of us could say that was an obsession, right? Except my son Seth, the one who's adopted from Guatemala, also is really obsessed with Zelda. He wears caps and shirts and plays it constantly, right? Is he having an obsession, or is it just his interest, right? I'm a fangirl of many communities, so does that translate, fangirl? So, I mean, I'm right there with John here. John was, I think, 19 at the time we did this. Here's a little girl named Kara who was at, well, I guess I don't need to say where she was, but she was in a deafblind program, and she was very young. She was 4 years old. She had very little, if any, formal communication. They were just starting to develop, you know, trying to use a calendar system with her and helping her understand things. She also had CHARGE. When I was doing an assessment of her, she almost always had her head down like this and was very ill. So this was her dreams that we did for her. Very young again. Her parents wanted her to be healthy, have relationships with her cousins or sister, continued happiness, walking. She wasn't yet walking. Spend days doing what she wants to do, eat normally, be as independent as she can, communicate, and show her abilities to the world. So you can see a lot of these are very broad, very vague, because she's very, very young still. This is what her family wanted for her. Here's an individual who had CHARGE syndrome, who was getting ready to leave school. And so we were trying to come up with a transition plan for him. And he was very communicatively capable. A lot of this he came up with himself. He wanted to have his own job. Oh, these have been translated, girl. Good, you can see that. He loved airplanes. So we were trying to get him working at the airport. We had to get people at the airport to understand him and to be willing to let him work there. Have more people to support him in his home community, because he was in a school where he had to travel to go to school. So he didn't know many people in the community. Be as independent as possible, have his own home, write his life story. He loved to write. He would write all the time. Join a boxing group, marriage and family, after-school activities, social leisure opportunities. These are all things that most adults want, right? You want to have social leisure opportunities. You want to continue learning. I just retired, but a few years ago I started a pottery business, and I have a pottery studio in my backyard, and I continue to learn every day. We continue to learn until we die, and we should all have that opportunity. So having someone with a disability have one job from the age of 20 years old all the way till death may not be that fulfilling. So we have to think about how people want to grow and change their dreams. All right, after we talk about the dreams, we have to talk about nightmares or fears in this person's life. We try not to spend too much time in this realm because it can be very frightening for the person and for their families. These are the barriers to realizing their dreams. They may be very emotionally charged, and then we have to think about them after we've written them all down when we're planning later in the process. How can we avoid these things? This is one of the reasons we leave all the papers on the wall so people can continue to look at them. Here were fears for Jacob during that same planning process. We had no one to look over him to look after him when his parents are gone. So again, he has 4 brothers, 2 of whom are married. And we were worried about the burden of asking someone to take over his guardianship. I've always been worried about that. And how can I ask anybody to take on, all the work that I do right now for him? And, because you want your other children to have very full lives as well, right? And so I'm not saying that Jacob is a burden, but I think you know what I mean when I say I didn't want any of them to feel obligated to take that on. Well, right now, 3 of them are fighting over who gets to be his guardian. It's the most wonderful feeling. I'm not sure any one of the 3 of them would do a great job, but maybe the 3 of them together and their spouses could work it out. So that has worked out. His communication misperceived as behaviors, right? So Jacob, I think, compared to a lot of individuals with CHARGE, is pretty mild-mannered. Again, he's got kind of our personalities are both pretty mild-mannered. I don't think it's because we're psychologists and knew what to do with his behaviors. I think it's just his personality. He's just an easygoing guy. But he does have certain behaviors that he does when he's in pain. It's the only time he ever shows any kind of behavioral differences. And so we know he's in pain. But if somebody else doesn't recognize that, will they punish his behavior? Will they do something to try to stop it when we need him to be able to communicate that? Institutional living and working. Living in a group home or working on what I said, like a work crew picking up trash. We did not want that for him from the very beginning. Social isolation, deterioration of his health. That's a huge fear for most of us who have children with CHARGE. Increase in challenging behavior, getting lost, wandering away, being alone, not having someone with him. Not have meaningful behaviors. And then always, for all of our kids, the possibility of abuse. How do we avoid these things? Here are John's fears and nightmares. This is the young man who was isolated in a separate classroom. Institutionalization, people giving up on him, lack of acceptance, staying isolated, being alone, not unlocking his potential, people having low expectations of him, seriously injure himself or others, never be independent enough to live on his own. He will lash out and someone will not understand why. These are real fears for that family because they were really struggling at that time with his behavior. Here's the little girl, Kara, 4-year-old. One nightmare was when she reaches puberty, will we have physical, behavioral issues? Lack of money support for programs. Being ridiculed. How many of you see that in our kids? We were just talking with someone a few minutes ago who was asking about how to help their child, your client have social acceptance. And some of these kids are ridiculed simply because of their facial features. Death. I mean, who doesn't have that nightmare for their kids? I certainly do because I've had it happen and I don't want it to happen again. Not know what to do after transition after school. Lack of progress and be a perceived burden to others. And then here's Jay, the young man who liked working in the airport, wanted to work in the airport. Nightmares were isolation from his community, no access to research sources. His immigration status, he was not, I'm not going to think of the right, documented immigrant. So they were afraid they were going to be sent back. And he lived in the Middle East somewhere, I can't remember where. And if he went back there, there would not be any educational resources for him. And he was at a really good school. And then being misunderstood. Okay, the next step is, how long do I have? 10:45? 45, okay. Who is the person? So we basically, what I do when I do this, people do these differently, but what I do is I'll put the person's name in the middle of a circle, and then I draw out the characteristics that people throw out and say are that person's characteristics. So who is this person? Who is Jacob? When you think of Jacob, who is he? And so you're looking at things like strengths, skills, likes and dislikes, personal qualities, favorite activities, and friends. How often do you get to talk about these things in a regular school meeting? This really opens it up to be very positive. We try to keep it as positive as possible, but sometimes things come up that are negative. We try to turn them around to sound positive. For instance, here are Jacob's. He's sneaky. He's opinionated, which is another way of saying he's stubborn and won't give up, his way when he wants it. He's a swimmer. He loves water. One of his friends said he's a kid who needs help. He's adaptable, extremely adaptable, stubborn, persistent. He's an equestrian because he had a horse that he rode for a while. Manipulative, affectionate, music lover, sense of humor. And then his little brother said, a guy who spits and likes to bite and throw things. Ticklish, clever, son, teacher. He's a teacher. We've had several people who work with him who were going to become special education teachers or occupational therapists. They're college students, and they will say that Jacob's the best teacher they had in college because of all they learned working with him. He's a hair puller. He's a puzzle. And this last one, not easily embarrassed. That's a positive way of saying he will take off his clothes anywhere. He has no modesty. Oh, 10:30? Okay. Thank you. Okay, so here is John. John, again, is the young man who was segregated into the separate room. He is driven. He was very good at math, orderly. He needs to have acknowledgement of his good work. He has low self-esteem. He likes being teased. He's a pruner. He liked to prune the bushes at their house. Good negotiator. He's a perfectionist. He's good in sports. He's a good navigator. He underestimates his own abilities. You can see that these are all very positive things. A task completer, you could give him work to do and he'd do it right away. But if the school team is only focused on his behavior, they will miss all of these other things. So it's important to bring these things to light in the meeting as well. And here's Kara over here, the 4-year-old. It says she is surprising, adorable. She's an explorer. She's giggly. She's super snotty because she was just constantly, stuff was coming out of her nose. She's a super licker. She's playful, determined, sassy, loving, clappy, meaning she claps all the time, and she knows what she wants, and she's surprising. Okay, after we do who is, then we ask, what are this person's gifts, strengths, and talents? And these are things that you can then build on to figure out what they should do in their day-to-day life. So for John, the boy who was segregated, he's really good at math. He has a hopeful outlook on life. He's willing to ask for help. He has a good memory. He's self-determined. He communicates. Here's the boy who, I get confused between who my people are. Oh, John's gifts, strengths, and talents. This is the boy who wanted to work in the airport and came from a different country. He has a good memory. He is eager to learn. He takes good care of himself. I mean, he's just immaculately groomed every day. hard worker, persistent, goal-directed, loves the structure of work routines. I mean, this was a dream student, right? He did everything right. He had no behavioral issues. If you could get the community to work with you, his future was open to anything. I mean, the only limits for him were other people, right? If you could get other people to agree to help him get where he needs to be, it was going to be perfect and easy. Kara's strengths, she's never sad, she's always happy. These are very similar to her, who is Kara. She's patient, she's an explorer. She has a high pain tolerance, and she brings her family together. Dislikes and likes. John likes school. John likes Zelda. So how can we use Zelda to motivate him? Do you know, could you use it as a way to reward more appropriate behavior, or you know, get your work done, you get to look at this Zelda book for a while, that kind of thing. These are important things to know individually. He loves SpongeBob. Does that translate? SpongeBob. He likes his own space. He likes nurses and doctors. That's unusual, I think, in Charge. Does not like new academic material, is kind of afraid of dogs. Does not like physical challenges. Doesn't feel like not being safe. Look at all these things under John's dislikes. How many of you dislike those things? Basically, we're helping everybody to see that this person is a human being, so much more like you than not like you, right? Here's Jay's dislikes and likes. He loves airplanes, loves working with flowers. He likes positive reinforcement, being successful. He hates being rushed. He hates being misunderstood. He hates bumping into things. That's right, he was extremely visually impaired, and if somebody bumped into him, he would lash out. Kind of like, who were you talking about yesterday? You know, hitting, you're in my way, right? And Kara's likes and dislikes. She likes the swing. She likes making noise and jumping and slinkies. You know what slinkies are? Swimming and water, drums, being on her back, stomping her feet, hugs, windows and bright lights, snuggles. She does not like having her hair brushed, having her teeth brushed, having her nose wiped, having her nails clipped, or having her hair cut. She does not like things being done to her, basically. All right, the next step in the plan, so we have who is the person, what are their dreams, their nightmares, what are their likes, dislikes. Now we have needs. So we take all of this information that we have up here and we generate a list of what are this person's needs. And it's not needs to learn how to do two-step multiplication, right? That's not a real need, right? It's not necessarily academic needs. It could be needs to learn to read to get along in the world, right? But you're looking at their future, whether they're 4 years old, 17, or 35, you're trying to plan for a perfect future for them. So we're looking at their hopes, strengths, and interests. There we are, hopes, strengths, and interests, activities, opportunities, and supports. The focus, again, is positive. So this can take a few minutes for people to be able to review what's on the papers. You may take a break here, everybody get some food, everybody look at what's on the papers, and come sit down and brainstorm what you think, based on all this information, the person needs. So here's what we came up for Jacob's needs at that meeting. Okay, those are translated. Social relationships, especially with men, because most of his carers are female. Friendships, natural supports, and by that I mean people around him who help him who are not paid to help him. Invitations to go places, guardianship that continues, communication, accommodating his vision and hearing. He needs work that fits him, which we already talked about. He got some work that fits him through doing the little pegboards. Recreation, being able to swim when he needs to. Having people he likes and trusts living close. And again, we live next door. Have a home life. So this was before he moved into his home. And we said he needed a hot tub, a vibrating chair, sensory toys, lava lamps, swings, all the things he loved in his home. And guess what? His home has all those things. It's just lovely. And that's because of this planning process. Health and safety, meaningful and appropriate adult services, continuing to educate others in charge. Balance between being alone and with others. He prefers to be alone. I mean, he wants you there for safety, but he will spend a lot of time alone. He's just like me. Again, I'm so introverted. I have to have alone time every day to get my energy back up. So having a balance, we don't want him to be alone all the time. He needs to have some social interaction so he can continue to have supports. And not just accept his uniqueness, but embrace it and see it as valuable. Okay, Kara's needs. Again, she's very young. How do we achieve dreams and avoid nightmares? Well, we need a plan for when she's older. A plan for housing. So she's 4 years old and we're already talking about where will she live. And this is important to be thinking about it all along. I believe that Jacob was 3 when we did his first person-centered plan, and at that time we said we wanted him to live in his own house near us. And part of the reason that happened is because we were thinking about it all of those years. Have love in her life, have a life plan, continued family support and other support, get a good education, socializations, high expectations. That's a hard one for individuals with charge. A lot of people see our kids and don't see what they can do. But the higher our expectations, the better they will do. Have money for her future, have the best medical care, maybe get an adaptive bike that she can use at home. Here are John's needs. Getting his inappropriate touching under control, interact with all sorts of people, have someone with him who knows how to read his behaviors. He needs to learn a way to be assertive without being aggressive. This was a very difficult one. Use the tools he has for communication more independently. He needs to be able to communicate when angry instead of lashing out. So you can see all of these things. Transition to work he enjoys. We talked about working at a video store because that's where the Zelda games are, right? Keep his academic expectations high. And then we talked about what are the barriers getting in the way for John. Because this was a situation where we were brought in because there was a lot of contention between the family and the school about what should happen. And by doing this person-centered plan, we were able to bring everyone together and come up with ideas that everyone could agree on. So instead of having everybody fight back and forth, doing this process brought the whole group together. There's a high rate of burnout for his staff. His behavior is a big barrier for him. Inconsistency across people, lack of communication, lack of support, lack of funding. Okay, so from the needs, now let's look at Jay's needs, I'm sorry. Jay needs, are these, yeah, these are all, you can just look over these. He needs total communication. He needs to be able to visit the airport, to be able to make that plan. Communicate his need for a break. Give him breaks when he needs them. It's something he needs very badly. Exploring leisure activities. Supported employment with a job coach and one-on-one support for safety and learning. U.S. citizenship would be very helpful for him. So you can see how these, so then we take the needs and we have all these papers on the wall for all of these kids and we turn these into an action plan. And that's where we really bring all the information down and bring it into actionable steps. So the action plan, and look at that picture of my husband, he's like 40 years ago or something. He's so young. Like, who is that guy? Where did he go? I don't know. The action plan helps you to move toward the dreams and avoid the nightmares in concrete ways. So for children, often we'll start with, what would a perfect day look like for this person? And we'll start with, I think when Jacob was young, we would say a perfect day would look like he gets on the regular bus with all the non-disabled kids, you know. He goes to school, he gets out, he goes into his kindergarten classroom, he has his one-on-one intervener, he eats lunch with the other kids, he goes to recess with the other kids because we were very interested in his inclusion. He gets all the educational supports he needs at school, people sign to him all day, you know, and he works towards his goals, and then he comes home and he has caregivers at home to help him. So just what would your perfect day look like, a perfect happy day? Who is willing and able to support, and then you get really to the nitty-gritty and you make a chart of who's going to do this and by what date. Okay, so you have to get commitments. You have to make sure there's a clear plan for follow-up. You can't just leave the person-centered plan and never come back to it. You have to follow up and make sure people are actually doing what they said they'd do. And we use the available agency supports as much as possible, and natural supports. So this is what it looks like when I do it. Here are some action plans we came up with. Here's Jay's action plan. This is the young man who came from a different country. Joint physical therapy with both his brothers. One of his dreams of his family was to have better relationships with his brothers because they were all deafblind. So they didn't do much together, right? They didn't have good connections with each other. But brothers, there were just two brothers. They both loved exercise. So we were going to have them do physical therapy together. The physical therapist would work with both of them on strength training and just kind of have them connect through that activity to make their PT sessions throughout the year be a way that they can connect emotionally and become better brothers. So it kind of meets a lot of needs right there, and it's quite unique. Self-regulation and leisure between brothers and with other students. So the occupational therapist was going to help him have leisure activities with other students throughout the year. Again, a very inclusive type of thing that you might not ever see in a regular school plan. The job coach was going to help make connections for the airport visit and work on finding him job sites by October 2018. After school activities, this one was interesting. His father was really pushing for him to be able to stay at the school for the summer activities, because as you know, people who are deafblind, they leave school in the summer, at least in the US, and they've got nothing to do, right? And it's really important for them to have continued support. So his father wanted the local school district where they lived, because this is how it works in the US, to pay the special school to keep him there during the summer. And the local school district did not want to do this. But we invited the administrator of the local school district to the plan. And during one of the breaks, I went up and I asked her, I said, do you think this is something that could happen? And she said, oh yes, we can make this happen. Just because she had been there through the whole thing. So it was a really important thing for him. Yeah, you can read through the rest of that. And again, something I neglected to say was that before the person-centered plan, you sit with the person while you're asking who they would like to invite. You also ask them what are their goals for their person-centered plan? What is it they're looking to get out of it? What issues would they like to avoid? They might say, I don't want anybody to talk about that I need a girlfriend, right? And the facilitator can make that happen just by, shutting down conversations that are about things that make the person uncomfortable. I don't want anybody to talk about my sexuality, things like that that are very sensitive to the person. So for that plan, we had the father and the son talk to us about, we really need to get this summer program going. So I knew that that was a way I could sort of nudge the discussion. Here's Kara's action plan. It's covered because it had people's names in it. A clear plan based on dreams, needs, and desires. She needs an adaptive tricycle. So we were trying to figure out how she could get an adaptive tricycle. And the CHARGE Syndrome Foundation in the United States has a recreational program where you can apply for funding for things like that, called the Ethan Wolf Adaptive, what is it called? Ethan Wolf Special Recreation Program. She was able to get a tricycle through that process. Have unified activities in her community. Again, she was at a segregated school outside of her community, but her parents wanted her to have friends in the community. So we were talking about, they'd talked about how their community has a strong soccer or football program for girls, and that she could become part of that, even though she was using a wheelchair, and they would find some way to adapt it for her so she could at least be there with other girls and make friends in her community. And then revisit the person-centered plan in a couple years. Come back in a couple of years and do this again. And then 3 years later, do it again. It's important to keep doing it so that you can keep updating what the needs are. I mean, we do this with our evaluations, right? In the United States, we are legally required to have evaluations in special education every 3 years. So we repeat the IQ tests, and we repeat the writing tests, and the reading tests, and the math tests. We should be just repeating this. This would be so much more meaningful. Okay, almost finished here. What would an ideal school setting look like for John? He'd be with peers at least some of the time, not in a separate school. Be respected as he is. Be prepared for post-school life. Independent. Work in the community. Find work he enjoys. Trust between the family and the school. That was really important because that was not happening. So here were the action steps. At John's annual meeting, the team would work on getting extended school year services for him, meaning during the summer. So you can see all these things, an educational report from Tim and Nancy. Bring John back to the middle school for adaptive physical education. Have him visit the high school, explore vocational options. So you can see they were still they still had quite a conundrum, weren't feeling super comfortable, but we had a limited amount of time and could only come up with action steps to get things started. But I believe he's doing well now. All right. Here are some outcomes. Jay and his brother now spend time together at school and have enhanced their relationship, and he's pursuing U.S. citizenship. So how much better is all of that for his life than your typical school goals? This is going to increase his quality of life. Kara is playing t-ball in her home community on the weekends. She's made friends with some non-disabled peers. And John is back in an integrated school setting and preparing for graduation. For our son, did I not switch to that slide? Where am I? Does that say things to remember? Okay, I must have skipped this. I don't have this picture up there. Oh, there it is. It's just out of order. Okay. So this is our son, Jacob. He has had person-centered plans throughout his life, beginning at age 3, actually, not 5, and he's now 35. He lives in his own home. He has 24/7 help to take part in all aspects of his life. He has 3 individualized part-time jobs in the community based upon what he likes and what he can do. He spends leisure time doing what he enjoys and visiting those he loves to be around. In terms of social skills and having friends, for a long time we talked about how his caregivers were his friends because they were all the same age he was, and it was wonderful. He had all these young women and young men around him constantly, taking him to their apartments, taking him to the park, doing fun things with him. Yes, they were paid to be in his life, but they were very lovely people, all college students, fresh, lots of ideas, you know, not people who had been working with kids with disabilities for 20 years and had burnout, do you know what I mean? And so they really were truly like friendships to him. Now he's older than all of them are, but it still feels like he has friendships. And, you know, he really has an enviable life. He doesn't just have an okay life. He has a life that most people would love. I mean, he's got a hot tub, and he has 3 jobs that he loves, and he gets to swim and lie out on a blanket in the sun when he wants to and do things that are interesting to him and people to help him all along the way. So, I mean, that would be great for anyone. All right, things to remember. I think I go to back one. There we go. Find a seasoned and skilled facilitator or get trained yourself. This is really important. If the facilitator doesn't know what they're doing, you won't get very far. I don't know what's available here in Germany, but I did do a training class at Perkins School for the Blind in Boston, which has now been turned into an online self-directed course, which I believe you can all access if you go to their website. It's me teaching how to do this. I think it's 5 weeks of self-direction, learning how to do this. It's in English, that's right, it's in English. Yeah, didn't think about that, I'm sorry. Keep the person at the front and center. Collaborate with families to figure out what's best for the individual. Get your other assessments done as needed, but always remember that you're focusing on the quality of life for the person. Right? I mean, if you have an individual, a young child that's learning basic academics, of course, they need to continue to learn their basic academics. For Jacob, that wasn't really important because we pretty much knew after a while that he wasn't going to be working on math and reading. I mean, he had difficulty with formal communication. So for him, we focused on life skills, independence skills, things like that. And again, yeah, those were written into his school plan. But how can you integrate your results and recommendations of your assessments into a bright future for the individual? Always be thinking about their future. How can you use person-centered planning to enhance the quality of life for your students? Think about what they'll be doing beyond your classroom. Just have one more. Oh yeah, this is fun. Wallpaper and markers can open the door to a new world. I love that. It's often hard to find vision in the school and human services world. The person whose life is being focused upon has the loudest voice. And what's required for admission is a personal relationship. And of all the meetings you might need to attend, this one will be worth it. People always leave and tell me, this was wonderful, I loved it, it was so uplifting, people were crying, people are laughing, people are celebrating. Everyone feels good at the end of one of these meetings. You won't fall asleep. Person-centered planning is a celebration of life. The reason we do everything on markers on the board is because this process was invented by some individuals in Canada who decided that doing things in colorful markers and with pictures, a lot of it is drawn pictures, helps individuals who don't have formal literacy skills to see what's being talked about in their own lives. So you need a tricycle, we're going to draw a picture of a tricycle, right? You want friends around you, we're going to draw a picture of a person with friends around them so that they're actually included in the process that way. Some of the materials come from this book, Increasing Person-Centered Planning Thinking, Improving the Planning, a manual for facilitators. And this is the book I teach from when I teach the facilitation. Did I make it? Oh, I made it, yes. Are there any questions?
Nein, sieht nicht so aus. Wir haben
It doesn't look like it. Julie just reminded me that we did have a translation made of a person-centered planning approach for one student. So that has been translated into German, the entire thing. So if you're interested, come and talk to us or just write to us after the event. We'll send it to you by email. It's available in both German and English, and we are allowed to share it, she just told me. So, and there are lots of examples also in the handouts in these presentations. So thank you very much. This was really, truly enriching. And at this point, we have some 15-20 minutes of break, and then we'll continue at 10:45. 10:45. Thank you.